In the quiet of her studio, nestled deep in the Catskill Mountains, Elara Vance applied the final glaze. The air, thick with the scent of linseed oil and pine from the surrounding forest, was her sanctuary. Sunlight, clear and sharp as it only is in the mountains, streamed through the large north-facing window, illuminating the canvas on the easel. The Cotterskill Gloaming. That was her name for it. A work that would soon captivate the world under another name, attributed to another hand. Her fingers, slender and stained with faint traces of raw umber and Indian yellow, hovered over the surface. The varnish, a secret recipe passed down from her grandfather, reflected her face, a quiet face with observant, intelligent eyes that saw the world in layers of pigment and light. She had spent a year on this piece. A lost masterwork in the style of Asherby, Durand. Not a copy, but a resurrection, a painting he could have, and should have, made. She had ground her own pigments, studied his unique brushwork for rendering foliage, and perfected his method of atmospheric perspective. The chime of her phone fractured the silence. The screen glowed with a single name, Genevieve. Elara took a slow breath, the familiar scent of turpentine suddenly more comforting than the call she was about to take. Hello. Her voice was even, a practiced calm. Is it finished, Elara? Her mother's voice on the other end was just as cool, a polished instrument of business, devoid of warmth. It is. Excellent. Crate it properly. My courier will be there tomorrow morning. And Elara, leave no trace. I know the procedure. And Julian has a major press event next Friday evening. I suggest you watch the live stream. The call ended. No goodbye. No thank you. Only instructions. Elara placed the phone down, her gaze returning to the painting. For a moment, she saw her grandfather, Marcus, in this very studio, his gnarled hands moving with impossible grace over a wooden panel. Your talent is a gift, Elara, he had told her, his voice raspy with age. But this world only celebrates the loudest voice. Hide your work. Let it serve the art, not the ego. She had honored his words. Hiding herself away in this mountain refuge, becoming the ghost who fabricated miracles for the Vance Gallery in Manhattan. A few days later, in a stark white gallery in Chelsea, her brother, Julian, gave an interview to a major art publication. He was impeccable in a bespoke suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, his English accent cultivated and charming as he stood beside the Cotterskill Gloaming. The painting now hung in an ornate, period-appropriate gilt frame, and Julian wove a beautiful story about his arduous journey to recover this lost piece of American heritage. On Friday evening, Elara sat alone in her studio, the live stream playing on her laptop. The flash of cameras was a frantic, silent storm. Julian and Genevieve sat at the center of a press table. Genevieve, elegant in a silk Chanel dress, announced with practiced poise that the Vance Gallery was partnering with Sotheby's to auction the Cotterskill Gloaming. The estimated starting bid was $50 million. A collective gasp, then thunderous applause, filled the room. Julian smiled, the easy, confident smile of a conqueror. Elara closed the laptop. The darkness of the studio enveloped her. The gilded cage she had built for herself felt as if its door had just been bolted shut. The art world was set ablaze. Headlines in the New York Times and the art newspaper celebrated Julian Vance's discovery of the century. He became an overnight icon, the brilliant young scholar who had rescued a national treasure from obscurity. The Vance Gallery ascended from a prestigious name to a legendary institution. Elara read it all online, cloistered in the silence of her mountain studio. She saw the accolades for Julian's unrivaled eye and profound artistic intuition. Words that described her soul, now attributed to him. She felt no anger. Only a vast, hollowing emptiness. She thought of her grandfather, Marcus. He had been a brilliant Hudson River School historian, but his career was ruined, his name disgraced by a professional rival who accused him of authenticating a minor forgery. Genevieve, his daughter-in-law and Ilara's mother, had been mortified by the scandal. After her husband, Marcus's son, drove the gallery to near bankruptcy, Genevieve had taken control with ruthless ambition. And Ilara, with the talent inherited from the very man Genevieve scorned, became the secret engine of the gallery's rebirth. 2 weeks after the press conference, a small article appeared in the American Art Journal, a publication read only by academics and museum curators. The author was Dr. Eris Thorne, a professor at Columbia University, known for his puritanical devotion to technical art history and his abrasive skepticism. The article was titled, "The Spirit of the Luminists and a Question Regarding Betrayal Gloaming." Dr. Thorne did not call the painting a fake. He lauded its technical brilliance, its masterful composition. But he posed sharp, insightful questions. He argued that Durand's work, for all its detail, always contained a certain philosophical restraint, a humility before nature, whereas, Gloaming was almost too perfect, too emotionally spectacular. More pointedly, he questioned a specific pigment, the unique, vibrant yellow used in the sunset's reflection on the water. He noted it had a chemical luminosity inconsistent with the cadmium yellows available in the mid-19th century. The article caused a minor stir among specialists but was quickly overshadowed by the hype surrounding the upcoming auction. It had, however, reached its intended audience. Genevieve called Ilara, her voice tight with fury for the first time. "That arrogant academic is trying to cause trouble. I need you to create a provenance. Now. Forge some letters from Durand mentioning the work, a bill of sale from an old family in New England. Get it done." Ilara felt a cold dread creep up her spine. Painting a forgery was one thing. But forging history, forging a person's words, was a line she had never been asked to cross. "Mother, I don't think. Don't you dare question me," Genevieve snapped. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to rebuild this family's name from the ruin your father left it in? Your talent saved us, Ilara. Don't let some foolish sentimentality destroy everything now." Ilara's chest felt heavy. She remembered her grandfather teaching her to identify the age of a varnish by its scent. To feel the difference between a boar bristle and a sable brush. "Art is truth, Ilara," he would say. "Every layer of paint, every brushstroke, is a record of a hand, a mind, a moment. You cannot lie to the canvas." Just then, a new email arrived in her inbox. Sender, Eris Thorne. Subject, research inquiry regarding Marcus Vance. Ilara froze. In the email, Dr. Thorne explained he was researching independent 19th-century art historians and had come across her grandfather's controversial work. He wanted to ask her a few questions about Marcus's specific techniques for paint analysis. His questions were surgical, precise, probing the very proprietary methods her grandfather had taught only to her. She understood instantly. Dr. Thorne wasn't just investigating the painting. He was hunting the painter. The email exchange with Dr. Thorne became a delicate, high-stakes chess match. Ilara responded cautiously, her answers vague and academic, trying to steer him away from any detail that might betray her. But the professor was relentless. He didn't ask about gloaming. He asked about her grandfather's philosophy. "Ms. Vance, I've read your grandfather's monograph on the chemical composition of 19th-century varnishes. He posits a theory about using distilled pine sap from a specific species of white pine to achieve a unique, non-yellowing quality. Can you elaborate on this?" Each question was a needle pricking at her conscience. Thorne was not an enemy. He was a seeker of truth, perhaps the only person in the world who wished to understand and honor her grandfather's malign genius. Meanwhile, the pressure from Genevieve intensified. The phone calls became daily, her voice more clipped and demanding each time. "The pre-auction symposium is in 2 weeks. I need that paperwork, Ilara. We need it to shut down any and all doubt." Ilara was trapped in a silent, internal war. On one side stood her family and the fragile, gilded security they provided. On the other was the truth, her grandfather's legacy, and her own artistic soul. She couldn't sleep that night. She went down to the studio and switched on a single work lamp. The soft light fell on another canvas on a separate easel. It was a commission from the Vance Gallery. A restoration of a small, heavily damaged Martin Johnson Heat luminist painting. In reality, it was a near-total recreation. Staring at the patches of sky waiting to be filled, an idea ignited within her. A quiet act of rebellion. She opened a small case tucked away in a drawer. Inside was a vial of pure, brilliant pigment, titanium white, a modern compound utterly unavailable to the 19th century masters. With a steady hand, she took a minuscule amount, mixed it into her white lead paint, and applied it as a subtle underlayer in a small, innocuous cloud formation. To the naked eye, it was invisible. Once she finished the painting, no one would ever know. But one day, an expert using X-ray fluorescence or spectroscopy would find it. A 21st century signature hidden in a 19th century sky. It was a time bomb, a secret message only someone like Eris Thorne could decipher. The act filled her with a strange sense of liberation. She could not continue this way. Her silence had enabled a lie so profound it desecrated the names of the masters and the true legacy of her grandfather. The next morning, she sent an email to Dr. Thorne. "Professor, I believe there are aspects of my grandfather's work that are best discussed in person. I would welcome the opportunity to meet with you." She sent another email to her mother. "I will not be creating the documents. I am coming to New York for the symposium. I believe I should be there." Genevieve's call came instantly, her voice a low hiss of fury. "Are you insane? What do you think you're doing? Coming here to sabotage everything?" "I'm coming to protect my grandfather's legacy," Elara replied, her voice imbued with a newfound steel. "And my own." She ended the call before her mother could utter another word. For the first time in her life, she had hung up on her. She looked around the studio that had been her prison for so many years. It no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a chrysalis. And she was finally ready to break free. The grand hall at Sotheby's in Manhattan was overflowing. Collectors, curators, journalists, and art aficionados filled the space, the air humming with anticipation and quiet tension. The pre-auction symposium for the Kotterskill gloaming was about to begin. Elara sat in a chair near the back. A quiet observer. She wore a simple black silk blouse and trousers, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was an island of understated calm in a sea of designer labels and glittering jewelry. On the stage, the Kotterskill gloaming was displayed under carefully calibrated lights, radiating an almost supernatural aura. It was perfectly, flawlessly beautiful. Genevieve and Julian sat in the front row. Her mother was the picture of regal elegance in a navy blue dress. But Elara could see the rigid set of her shoulders. Julian, by contrast, was in his element, waving to acquaintances with a confident, easy grin. Elara spotted Dr. Thorne across the room. He met her eyes and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. His gaze held no curiosity, only a quiet expectation. The symposium began. After a few opening remarks from the auction house director and a fawning art critic, Julian took the stage. He was the star of the show. He spoke with practiced passion, his voice resonating through the hall as he recounted the story of his discovery, analyzing the painting's beauty with eloquent but hollow words. He spoke of the soul of the artist, the yearning for a lost American Arcadia. He spoke about everything except the actual art. The audience was captivated. Elara felt a bitter smile touch her lips. He was paraphrasing her own private notes. The thoughts she'd written down during the creation process, effortlessly making them his own. After his speech, the floor was opened for questions. A few hands went up, polite inquiries about the Vance Gallery's future plans. Then, Dr. Eris Thorne stood up. A hush fell over the room. "Mr. Vance, my congratulations on a truly remarkable find," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "I have just a small technical question. I'm particularly fascinated by the glaze used to capture the light on the water. It has a depth and clarity that is quite extraordinary. My research indicates that to achieve such an effect, luminist painters of the era often used a complex copal varnish, which had to be heated and applied in a very specific, multi-layered process. Could you please elaborate on the particular method Mr. Durand employed for this piece?" The room went silent. The question was too technical, too precise. The smile on Julian's face tightened. He blinked, trying to maintain his composure. "Ah, yes, an excellent question. The use of copal varnish was indeed a hallmark of the period. Asher B. Durand, with his genius, was a master of such techniques, using them to create a unique visual dialogue between light and landscape." He was rambling, talking around the question. His lack of knowledge becoming painfully apparent. Dr. Thorne didn't interrupt. He just listened, his silence more damning than any accusation. The moderator, sensing the escalating tension, tried to intervene. "Thank you, Professor. Perhaps we could. Perhaps a member of the Vance research team could clarify." Dr. Thorne interjected smoothly, his eyes suddenly finding Elara in the crowd. "I believe Ms. Elara Vance, granddaughter of the esteemed Marcus Vance, is in attendance today." Every head in the room swiveled in her direction. An invisible spotlight had just found her. Genevieve shot her a look of pure venom. Julian stared at her, his eyes pleading. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. She took a deep breath, stood, and began the long walk toward the audience microphone. The only sound in the vast hall was the soft, steady click of Elara's heels on the polished floor. She didn't look at her mother's furious glare or her brother's desperate face. Her eyes were fixed on the image of the Kotterskill gloaming, projected in enormous detail on the screen behind the stage. She was looking at her own work. When she reached the microphone, she didn't speak immediately. She let the silence stretch, drawing all the tension in the room toward her. "The professor's question is a valid one," she began. Her voice clear and strong, resonating with an authority that surprised everyone. No one had expected this quiet, unassuming woman to possess such a commanding presence. To achieve that specific luminosity, the artist did not use a standard copal varnish. She spoke slowly, methodically, as if delivering a lecture. "The base is indeed copal, but it was sourced from the kauri trees of New Zealand, not the more common African variety. It had to be heat-cured for precisely 100 hours at a low temperature to prevent discoloration." She paused, glancing at Julian. The color had drained from his face. "But that is not the secret," she continued. "The secret is in the solvent. The artist used a distilled oil of spike lavender, not the typical turpentine. This allowed for thinner, more translucent layers. The final glaze contains a minute quantity of ground selenite crystal, which has a unique refractive index, creating that sense of light originating from within the paint itself." The room was breathless. Even Dr. Thorne looked at her with a new level of awe. The details she provided were too intimate, too specific, to have been learned from a book. It was the knowledge of a creator. Elara turned to face the painting on the screen. The great masters often hid their marks in plain sight, her voice grew softer. More personal. An intimate signature, a secret only another artist would understand. She raised a hand, pointing toward a gnarled, ancient tree in the foreground of the painting. "If you were to examine this painting with infrared reflectography, focused on the bark of that hemlock tree." She took one final, deep breath, preparing to detonate the truth. "You would find a tiny, almost invisible mark, inscribed into the wet underpainting with a silver point stylus. It is not the signature of Asher B. Durand. She looked directly at Genevieve and Julian, her gaze stripping away all their lies. It is a stylized rendering of a starling. A Vance in Old German. My grandfather's hidden mark. And my own. A stunned, deathly silence fell over the hall. Then, a low murmur began, swelling into a roar of whispers and frantic typing on phones. Genevieve sat frozen. Her regal composure shattered into a million pieces. Julian stood on the stage like a statue, the camera flashes assaulting him, but he was no longer there. The grand illusion had vanished. Elara said nothing more. She placed the microphone back in its stand, turned, and walked calmly out of the hall, leaving the chaos in her wake. She hadn't confessed to a crime. She had simply stated an irrefutable fact, proving her authorship in the only language that world truly respected. The language of creation itself. The storm broke immediately. The auction was suspended, then cancelled. The Vance Gallery became the epicenter of the most sensational art fraud scandal in recent American history. Reporters camped outside the Chelsea Gallery and the family's Upper East Side townhouse, but the doors remained shut. Julian and Genevieve vanished from the public eye. The empire Genevieve had built on a foundation of lies crumbled into dust overnight. Elara was summoned for questioning by the district attorney's office. She answered every question with calm precision. She admitted to being the creator of the Kotterskill gloaming. She maintained that she was acting as a contract artist for the gallery and was unaware of the fraudulent intent to sell it as a genuine Durand. Since no money had changed hands and she had been instrumental in exposing the fraud, she avoided prosecution. Her only penalty was a formal censure from the Art Dealers Association of America. It was a small price to pay for the freedom she had just won. She did not stay in New York to witness the fallout. She didn't answer the dozens of frantic calls from her family. There was nothing left to say. She took the first train back to the Hudson Valley. As she stepped off at the small station in Hudson and breathed in the cool, damp air that smelled of earth and river, she felt she was returning home from a long and grueling exile. The studio was as she had left it, cluttered with the tools of her trade, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a haven. It felt like her own. In the following weeks, a new kind of normal began to take shape. She took down the old, unmarked sign on her driveway and replaced it with a simple, hand-carved wooden plaque. Elara Vance. Fine Art Conservation and Restoration. Word of the quiet artist who had toppled an empire with her expertise spread through the art world. Some admired her courage. Some condemned her for destroying her family. But no one, not a single person, denied her talent. One crisp autumn afternoon, Dr. Eris Thorne drove up from the city. He brought a bottle of single malt scotch. They sat on the porch of her studio, sipping the whiskey as the sun set over the mountains, and they did not speak of the scandal. They spoke of art. They discussed the lost techniques of the American folk painters, the chemistry of pigments, the spiritual quality of a Bierstadt landscape. Before he left, he looked at her, his usual skepticism replaced by a genuine respect. "Your grandfather would be immensely proud of you," he said. Elara smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes. It was the most meaningful praise she had ever received. She was no longer an anonymous ghost. She was Elara Vance, an artist. She had not only reclaimed her own name, she had restored honor to her grandfather's. She had rewritten the ending of her family's story. And in doing so, she had finally begun to write the first chapter of her own. Months turned into a year. Elara's studio was never short of work. She turned down lucrative offers from wealthy collectors to recreate other lost masterpieces. Instead, she focused on pure restoration, taking on projects that held historical and artistic significance. She restored faded portraits from local historical societies and repaired water-damaged landscapes for small regional museums. The work wasn't glamorous, but it filled her with a profound sense of purpose. With each piece she brought back to life. She felt a connection to the original artist, a quiet dialogue across time conducted through brushstrokes and layers of paint. One day, a formal letter arrived. It was from the board of the Olana State Historic Site, the magnificent home and studio of the Hudson River School painter Frederick Edwin Church, which was just across the river. They were inviting her to lead a major conservation project, the restoration of several of Church's large-scale oil sketches, which had suffered significant environmental damage over the decades. It was an honor, and a monumental challenge. These were not just paintings, they were national treasures, and their restoration required a masterful hand and an encyclopedic knowledge of Church's techniques. Elara accepted without hesitation. The project lasted more than a year. She spent her days at Olana, working in a specially prepared conservation studio that overlooked the same sweeping vistas Church had painted. She led a small team of conservators, many of them older artisans who, like her grandfather, possessed immense skill but little public recognition. She learned from their experience, and they respected her deep, intuitive understanding of the materials. She was no longer the solitary artist in a secluded studio. She had found her community, a fellowship bound by a shared reverence for the heritage they were preserving. The day the project was completed, the restored sketches were unveiled in a special exhibition at Olana. They glowed with a new vitality, their colors vibrant, their light seemingly restored from within. At the opening ceremony, the director of the site gave a speech, and Elara's name was mentioned with deep gratitude and admiration. She stood quietly at the back of the crowd, looking at the paintings she had helped save. For the first time in her life, she felt she truly belonged. Her work was not hidden. It was displayed with pride, for thousands to see. It had become part of a legacy larger than herself. That evening, she returned to her studio and made a cup of tea. She sat in her favorite armchair, looking out the large window at the darkening mountains. The sounds of the city were gone, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the night breeze. She no longer thought of Julian or Genevieve. They belonged to a distant past, a different world. Forgiveness was still an impossible concept, but the anger had faded, leaving only a quiet indifference. They had tried to shrink her to fit inside their frame. But she was not born to be framed by others. She was born to build her own. A knock on the door startled her. A delivery driver handed her a rectangular package. Inside was a book, a newly published, heavyweight academic tome. A technical history of 19th-century American painting. A small note tucked inside simply said, "See page 412. A.T." It was from Dr. Thorne. She turned the heavy pages, the smell of fresh ink filling the air. She stopped at a new chapter, one not present in previous editions, titled Independent Scholars and the Rediscovery of Lost Techniques. There was a section dedicated to her grandfather, Marcus Vance. Finally recognizing his brilliant, if controversial, contributions to the field of pigment analysis. And directly following it, there was a section about her. Accompanying the text were two photographs. The first was a high-resolution image of the Kotterskill gloaming, with the caption, "A masterful example of modern stylistic forgery, demonstrating a profound, if illicit, understanding of the Hudson River School's methods." The second was a photo of her. She was standing on a scaffold at Olana, face concentrated in the light, a tiny brush in her hand as she meticulously restored a patch of sky in a Frederick Church painting. The caption for that photo was just one sentence. Conservator Elara Vance. An artist who does not merely restore paintings. She restores the truth. Elara closed the book gently, and placed it on the mantelpiece, next to a small, faded photograph of her grandfather. She looked out the window again, where a full moon was rising over the dark, sleeping silhouette of the mountains. Her signature was no longer a secret hidden in the bark of a tree. It was a mark of honor, printed in a book of history, for all the world to see.